Welcome to the Beth Yeshua podcast. For more episodes like this, visit bethyeshua.org/media. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Beth Yeshua podcast. And if you were ever wondering if we are about to get canceled, this is probably the episode where we finally get canceled. I was just asking my mom. I was like, Mom, do you know what cancel culture means and what canceling means? And she was like, no, I don't. And it's like, well, it's a place, especially online, where you've taken an argument like too far and people are all done with you. And so they cancel you and they say like, you're like your persona non grata, like nothing you say matters. And they try to destroy you on social media. I mean, that would work if we had social media or if we cared, I suppose. But we don't. And the reason why we might get canceled for this one today, guys, is because the same day that we released our last recorded podcast, which was actually the day we recorded it, it was on Valentine's Day, we actually I listened to a podcast that also came out from another Messianic group on the exact same day. And it was going through... it's actually called Inclusions and Distinctions, I think is the name of that podcast. Inclusion and Distinctions. I'll just bring up the actual title here. In Messianic Judaism, Part 1. And so I began listening to this and I was like, oh, Mom, you got to listen to this because it's just coming from a very different place, right? It's coming from a very different place of what we believe as far as like inclusion and distinction. And there's this conversation of discrimination versus distinction, and I just thought it was really important that we put something out. Not that anybody's listening to this at all. I don't know if people are listening to this, but I want people to understand that multi-Judaism, Messianic Judaism is multifaceted. There's
Absolutely.
Lots of different expressions of Messianic Judaism. And the one that this other podcast, and I don't know how many people are listening to that either, but the one, the issues that they're addressing, I think reasonable people can actually disagree about. And we often present things, even in our podcasts, as if this is the future of Messianic Judaism and this is the right way to go. And like, guys, we're doing the best we can. With what information we have now, we are trying to move forward in Messianic Judaism the best way that we know how. And so I sent this to my mom, and I said, Mom, do your teacher thing. Take this apart piece by piece. And she's got notes. She's got like all kinds of notes, and like she's ready to go. She's like, yep, all right, let's talk about it. And so we spent, we spent like maybe 2 hours this morning talking about it already. Like we've spent multiple hours discussing this and talking about what we both, where we both come from. Obviously, Mom, you have a longer history in Messianic Judaism than me in some ways, even though I was kind of raised in it underneath you and Dad. But you've been part of the movement as an adult for, 35 years?
No, really.
40?
Pretty much about almost 50. Almost 50 years, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and we wanted to kind of offer that other perspective. So, a little bit of housekeeping first. Hey, if you want to see us, go to YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify. They show our faces too. Not that you would want to, but go if you want to look. On YouTube, it's Beth Yeshua SAC, S-A-C, because we're in Sacramento. And I would also encourage you, because we're going to go into a very detailed discussion on Part 1 that they have put up here. I would encourage you to listen to their podcast. Go and listen to it in its entirety, hear where they're coming from. And I even wanted to play one of the clips that I have in mind for us to discuss, because I want you to hear the voices of these rabbis. I don't want you to think that we're in any way denigrating them or talking down about them. And I'd love for you to hear them in their own words, in their own terms, and without it being broken up. So like full context, right? So if you're following along at home, I'm going to put the link down in the notes, but also go to Messiantics Podcasts or podcast. And so that's MESSIAN square bracket, capital T, square bracket, ICS podcast, Messiantics. which is, I think, a great name, because sometimes Messianic Judaism does feel like a bunch of antics and shenanigans and nonsense sometimes. But go listen to that first. You could pause us and come back to us later if you care to hear our perspective. I actually feel like I should offer a prayer really quick. Is that okay, Bubby?
Absolutely.
God, we desire no division in the body of Messiah. And we love these rabbis. We're just asking for you to give us the words that your Spirit would guide us during this conversation that we have as we unpack and we debrief. Free us from any brokenness that's inside of us. Help us to come to a place of clarity and helpfulness for people that are listening. We love you, God, and we want you to be glorified. Yes, even in a podcast, maybe especially in a podcast.
Amen.
In Yeshua's name.
Amen.
Amen. So I don't know if you saw this, Bubby. I actually went into their show notes for that episode. And one of the rabbis, Rabbi David, has actually written a book on this topic. His book is One New Man Revival. And it's by David, and I'll let you guys go and listen to their podcast if you want to know his last name. I'm not going to say their last names because it sounds like they don't really want people to say their last names, and I want to respect that. We already had our, we went to Israel. We tried to make Aliyah. They know that we're believers. So, hey, I'm Joshua Rubenstein. I'm in Sacramento and whatever. You can find me. But I understand, honestly, within Messianic Judaism, especially for people that might want to make Aliyah, the Misrat HaPanim doesn't really like Jewish believers in Messiah, in Yeshua. And so they block us from making Aliyah. So I understand. I understand people wanting to be discreet. Anyways, you can look at this book, One New Man Revival by Rabbi David. I have not read the book, full disclosure. The only thing that we've done is listen to one episode of their podcast. But why don't we go through, and Mom, I know that you have notes on this. I have some notes on things that I want to talk about. And why don't you start going through? I think you said that you had 7 to 10
maybe
something like that, or
roughly 7 probably points that we might want to address. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the overriding one, the first one, was they made a comment that various social media podcasts or whatever have been putting up references to that would limit the involvement of non-Jewish persons and it within our Messianic synagogues. And their take on that is that those who do that, it's easier to just outlaw something completely rather than deal with governance of it. And so what would you say to that?
I would say that I agree in principle with what they're saying. I think that often within religious conversations or conversations about faith or conversations about God, I think it's much easier for a body of Messiah to have a halacha, to have a list of rules, a list of things that are do's and do nots, and to put that out and put the burden onto people to follow that so that they fit in properly with the body, rather than go to people and have a conversation with them, rather than disciple people, rather than really get into the actual intimate relationship and the pushback that can often come from hard conversations. So I actually agree in many ways. I think that often especially in religious conversations, because it can be dicey and you're talking about, have people really heard from God? Did you really hear from God? What does the Word of God say? What's the correct way to interpret it? These are kinds of conversations where people can get very hurt very quickly and really feel like they're being wounded when all you're trying to do is have a conversation with them or bring clarity. So I do understand that, and yet I think that statement in itself is that really them understanding all of... Now, I don't know who made these social media posts, but do they actually know those Messianic congregations or Messianic synagogues? Have they been to them? Like, I've never been to Rabbi Eric or Rabbi David or Jonathan or Toby's congregations. I do not know what their body is like. And that's actually one of the issues that I have that I want to bring up later. But like, so I have no idea, and it would be really presumptuous for me to say, like, I know what's going on in their body and they should do X, Y, and Z. Do they really know that the people that made these posts on social media, like, haven't done that? Do they know that they didn't go to people first and have these conversations and try to wrestle through it with people?
We don't know.
Do they, like, and we've done that for 30 years in our congregation. We've had many conversations with people about Jew and Gentile, one in Messiah, one in one room. How do we do this? How do we live our lives? What is distinction that's healthy? What feels like discrimination versus distinction? We've had many of these conversations. And so I think it's a little bit, we talked a little bit about this. You know how in debate there's like the strong man or the iron man and the straw man arguments, right? And so often what you do, like if you're debating people, is like sometimes if you're not a great debater, you'll put up the straw man version of their argument and smack it down. Like, I win. No, like you should take the strongest argument of your opponent and go and really try to take that apart and show why it's fundamentally wrong. And I'm not sure that they're doing that by just beginning with that statement. Like, how do they know that these communities haven't wrestled, maybe even for decades like we have? How do they know the hearts of these leaders? How do they know that discipleship isn't a part of this? How do they know that, like, and maybe they're right. I don't know. Like, I don't know what social media posts, which is why we actually decided to say who we're actually talking to in this pretend dialogue. Maybe we should all just like get together and do one big podcast, and that would be fun.
That'd be interesting.
We should just like have the big conversation.
Yeah.
But like, I don't have, when I can hide behind anonymity a little bit and say, like, somebody out online is saying X, Y, and Z, and let me take apart X, Y, and Z, I think that feels weaker. So I would really love to know what social media posts they're referring to. Who are these people? I have some guesses. My guess is that it's MJRC affiliated people within the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations. That would be my guess. The Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council. And the reason for that is because they actually have a halacha. They have a document that they've established for their member rabbis to abide by, of like the role of Jew and Gentile within communal worship, reading Torah from the Bima, making an aliyah, those sorts of things, right? Like they have it. So my guess is that it's those people. But I don't know. So I agree with them. I think that sometimes spiritual leaders get lazy. And we've talked about this, about being a teacher. And as a teacher, it's so easy to tell the whole class off. And just like, you guys, what are you doing? And how dare you? But no, there's one kid talking. There's one kid. Like, go to him and talk to him. Like, you got to be specific. You actually really have to like address the actual problem. So them talking about it in vague terms, I don't think is super helpful. It'd be nice to know, like, who they're referring to. And I don't know whether or not, because I don't know the original posts, are those people actually doing their due diligence? Like, I don't know. Are they having good conversations with their communities? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of these rabbis, just like us, in good faith and in obedience to God, are trying to do what they think is right for their community. I don't think anybody's like trying to be on the path to hell. Nobody's trying to do that. Right? No. So
we all know that we're going to be held accountable for what we've been given, and how important it is to do it God's way. And that's our heart's desire, and we hope that's everybody's heart's desire. Correct, but I think the thing that comes across to me. The thing that comes to me is, and I am Gentile, and I raised you. Yeah. And so I am coming at it from another standpoint, and I'm looking at, I don't see that I don't think that we are relegating non-Jewish people to a role by maybe allowing or not allowing this or that to happen, whether they wear this or that, whatever, or participate in this or that. I feel like we are elevating them to a spot in the congregation, whether or not they're in a mixed marriage, which we are. I was in a mixed marriage, you're not. But so I feel like we're actually elevating people to a place of service, regardless. I mean, you're a rabbi. You serve your people. That's your highest calling, is to serve your people. That's not a bad place. So one of the things that they brought up is, are we just relegating non-Jewish people to become the Shabbos goy, so to speak? Okay. And so in doing that, but the word relegate to me is such a negative one. It's like
demeaning.
It's demeaning. And it's like saying to a woman, we're going to relegate you to, well, you were made a woman. You have to subject yourself to this, that, or the other. We've had all these conversations. We've done a lot about women and who they are and how God made us. But to me, I'm saying I'm not relegated. I'm elevated. Because I am helping serve a community as a Gentile, identifying as a Gentile, but having a home that helps my children and my grandchildren know that they are indeed identifiably Jewish. And that's important. So
it's interesting to me.
To me, the negativity is being interjected here rather than
value.
It's back to the value. We talked about value.
Right. And we do need to discuss this, although I'd kind of like to go back to like kind of chronologically going through the podcast.
Okay.
I think we have, and we've beat this horse to death on our own podcast, so we don't need to spend a ton of time here. We as people ascribe value to people based on the roles that they have. And we often do it in incorrect ways. So we have an elevated view of the person who's up on the platform who gets to give the sermon, and then the person who is helping in the children's ministry is lesser, right, in our eyes. Now we can say all we want, like, oh no, before God they're both equal, but like really when we look at it in our kind of our fleshly reality that we all walk around in, nobody's going to go to that person who's working in the kids' room and have a conversation with her about halakhic identity or anything else, right? Or like, what are her thoughts on like Jew and Gentile, one and Messiah, or even just like how to raise godly kids, right? They're going to go to the person who's up on the platform. We elevate in terms of value. And it's interesting, we talked about this briefly, that the kingdom of heaven is actually a reversal of that, where Yeshua actually says to people, and so it's kind of weird that it's the Shabbos Goy, and honestly, like the Shabbos Goy idea just in general is like, first of all, it's a workaround for people that want to be able to break the laws without breaking the laws.
Exactly.
I have a problem with that. Like, if you're actually really trying to take on all of the laws, but you need somebody to come in and like turn on the lights because that's your observance, like, I think that you need to check what you're doing and why first. Right. And secondly, Yeshua said that whoever wanted to be the greatest should become the servant of all.
The servant of all, absolutely.
And a lot of what I heard in this podcast, and I love these brothers in the Lord, I was concerned about that blurring of the line between distinction and value. I think that often, and it was actually came about in this particular clip that I want to play to people, in the use of the word discrimination.
Right.
To me, there is a difference, although it's a very technical and slight one, and I don't know if it only exists in my mind. I thought about Googling the technical definitions of things, but now who knows who's in control of those. But there's a difference between discrimination and distinction. The difference between those two words in my mind is that discrimination assigns value based on differences.
On distinction.
Whereas distinction is the reality that things are just different. That there is actually a difference between these things. And the weird thing to me, and I know that this might seem like me propping up a straw man argument. So like rabbis, take me to town. But like there was this guy, biological male, who was racing all of the female swimmers. I don't know, like, what was his name? I think he called himself Leah. I don't know what his real name was, right? And all of these people were having to call him, like, a female because that's what he wanted to be called, right? And so they all had to pretend that there was actually no distinction between this 6'4" man who clearly is a man and like these other people who are women. And there was also this valuative thing that came into it too, of like the way that he actually could become the best swimmer in the world, because he was a mediocre swimmer when he was a man. The way he could become the best swimmer in the world was to compete against women. Right? And so there was this valuative thing to him of like, I need to stand in this place so that I can receive value, rather than embrace who I am and wrestle through the actual real life that I have, which is, for him, he's actually a man, and he's a good swimmer, but he's not the best in the world for men, and he never will be. And so he needs to move on with his life. But rather than that,
Absolutely.
I mean, like the blurring there and the forcing of people to not recognize distinction and to call it discrimination. It's called discrimination if you don't treat him like a woman because he wants to be treated like a woman. Now, I don't think any of these rabbis would like say that transgender or any of this other stuff is acceptable or pleasing before the Lord. I don't think that. But I think that what we're getting at is like this weird thing where there are differences. There are actual differences. And so when Paul says there's no longer,
Greek
male
nor Jew,
nor
or
female,
male nor
Greek
female.
nor Jew, slave nor free, right? He's not abolishing distinctions. He's saying in value we are the same. And so much of this conversation felt about value.
Absolutely.
Felt about value. The only way for people to feel value is for them all to be able to do the same things. No. Are my children less valuable than me because I happen to be like a 200-pound man who can lift more than them and who can do the jobs that I do and bring home the bacon? Are they of less value?
Turkey bacon.
Turkey bacon, yeah. No. And so like we do this all the time. We get into this thing of like to notice the distinctions and to say that people have different roles and different things to do becomes a valuative prospect, and it's not supposed to be.
Right. Well, that is interesting because I think that's all of the kind of identifiers that we're seeing that people are there's so much contention about today. But in all of them, every person has a way that God made them to be. And along with that, what he created was their ability to do that thing and their joy in doing that thing and their value in doing that thing. But that's almost like we're slapping God in the face and saying, well, no, I'm sure you really meant to make me this. And we've had people come in and say, well, I'm sure God really meant to make me a Jewish person. You know, so it kind of gets into that realm too. So do you want to
let's go through them in order.
A few of their points? Okay.
Yeah.
One of them was, kind of going through some of the things that might happen in a congregation where if you're saying you're not Jewish, so therefore we would not, it's really about what not to do rather than what to do, but it's, should a non-Jewish person wear kippah? Is the next point that they brought up. And for them, they got into whether or not a kippah denotes somebody is Jewish and in what environments does that mean? I mean, of course.
And they kind of like blended right away into talit, right? It was like kippah and talit as like identifiers of Jewish identity. So what are your thoughts on that? Like we have a halacha at Beth Yeshua that we've come to after many years of kind of wrestling through this. But what are your thoughts on, to you, well, and man, there's so much distinction. Let's just say it this way. When a person comes into Beth Yeshua and they put on one of the kippot that we have out at the back for people, what do you assume about their identity?
I assume that nothing. I assume I don't know if they're Jew or Gentile.
Right.
I know that they're trying to show respect. And that's why we indicate anyone who wants to wear one of these, it shows respect. And that's the only thing. But now, if I see somebody in Israel wearing a kippah, I'm going to assume they're Orthodox Jew. I mean,
Well, and it depends on where they wear it and what kind it is,
and right where it's located on the head, etc.
and that's what kind of a Jew they are. So yeah, there's a difference between being inside of a synagogue and wearing a kippah.
That's right.
And being outside of a synagogue and wearing kippah.
Yes.
And I feel like that's an important distinction to make.
Okay.
Because when you wear a kippah out and about, I would think, like, if I see a person and they're in the Whole Foods and they're wearing a kippah,
in America,
I think, like,
right?
That's a Jewish person.
Yes.
If I see that person, like, in Israel out in public, I assume they're a Jewish person, right?
Right.
Like, it's a reality of public identification of cultural Jewish identity, right?
Right.
And sometimes, well, in the United States, it means maybe a certain level of observance, right? There may be conservative or conservadox or orthodox. And so, like, there are justifiable conclusions that you can make about that. But inside of a building, and this is like the difference also, we have to be very careful about, like, saying, when you walk into a building, what are the cultural expectations there? What are the cultural expectations if you walk into a church? What are the cultural expectations if you walk into a synagogue, a traditional synagogue? And what are the congregational expectations within a Messianic synagogue if you walk in? And every Messianic synagogue might be different. So, like, some Messianic synagogues, like, they actually have, like, like kippot and talatot, and they're like, hey, put on a talis, put on a kippah before you come in. That's not what we do, right? So when we see a person wearing a kippah in our congregation, for us, it's like if they were in a normative synagogue and they were a Gentile observer just coming in and hanging out, or they had a friend that invited them or something like that, the friend would probably even say, hey, put on a kippah. Like, it's like if you're like coming in, put on a kippah. And that's traditionally only for guys, but put on a kippah. It shows respect before God. So and then to blur that into talitot, which is actually a commandment.
Right. That was the distinction, too, that we need to make, is that the putting on a kippah is not a commandment, but wearing a tzitzit is. And it says unto to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right.
Well, it says speak to the Israelites.
Where is that? That's in...
let's go into this, because he actually brings this up also. This is Numbers 15.
Yes.
And there's a bunch of different laws and ceremonial things that are happening here, offerings for unintentional sins, which is actually really interesting.
Yes.
Because there is actually some context here that is important. And I'm not trying to be, like, devious and be like, oh, well, because of context, we can throw this scripture out. Okay. One of the rabbis, I believe it was Rabbi Eric, said, and you might actually have it written down as like an actual quote, but he said that this commandment in Numbers 15 was given to a mixed multitude.
Right.
Now, that is actually correct. Like, who was present when Moses said this thing or sang this thing, or it became a reality, like, of like him, pronouncing it, and for it to be something in the community memory? Yes, there were people who had come out from Israel, from Egypt, who were Jews, and people who were Egyptians, and they were together physically. However, this phrase, speak to the Israelites, or speak to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is where we see other places where it does that. The actual Hebrew, obviously, is Bnei Yisrael, which means literally the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob, right? So, and just before this, and so this would be my, like, maybe theological disagreement with Rabbi Eric. The context right before this, God actually does have Moses speak to sojourners that are in the community separately. He's actually addressing them. First of all, he starts off in Numbers 15, speak to the Israelites and say to them, after you enter the land, I'm giving you, right? And so he, like, goes into that, and these are all the offerings that you're to bring. And then he says in verse 13, everyone who's native born must do these things in this way when he brings an offering made by fire as an aroma pleasing to Adonai. For the generations to come, whenever an alien or anyone else living among you presents an offering made by fire as an aroma pleasing to the Lord, he must do exactly as you do. This community is to have the same rules The community is to have the same rules for you and for the alien living among you. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the alien shall be the same before the Lord. The same laws and regulations will apply both to you and to the alien living among you. Now, this brings up, and we've heard lots of people from Hebraic roots talk about this as a justification for non-Jewish people to take on every Jewish observance, like every Jewish observance that they can, which sometimes ends with the ones actually in the Tanakh, and sometimes continues on into even cultural observances, like wearing a kippah out in public, or wearing tzitzit out in public, and other things like that, right? And so, yes, there is this reality. He is talking about sacrifices, but then he also broadens it out to laws, right? And so you could interpret this as like, well, he's just meaning the sacrifices, and if you do bring a sacrifice, that's worship before God, so you need to be careful. Or you could say like, no, all of these laws are actually applicable to all of the people. Now, there are still, however, some that are specific, where he says this phrase right before it, speak to the Israelites, or speak to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it seems that there is still distinction within that reality.
Yes.
And there's even the sojourners here, a little bit earlier.
Are you talking about... Well, the other thing that's brought up right there that I wanted to bring up is the wording is in chapter 15, verse 16, the same Torah and standard of judgment. So you will all reap the same consequences if you do these things, whether you're a foreigner or you are a son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right. You're going to reap the same. Even if you do it and you didn't know it was a law,
right?
You're going to get the results. It's like, I don't believe in gravity. I'm still going to fall off the cliff. If I walk out there, I'm going to fall off the cliff. It's like a natural law saying that all human beings are subject to judgment on the same things, even if they didn't know about them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I agree.
That didn't make anybody, it's not talking about who is or is not, except that he does keep saying the sojourner. And why would he even talk about the alien? Why would, the alien or the foreigner in this foreigner in this one. So why would he even keep referring to them that way if they had already been assimilated to the extent that they no longer had a distinction separate
the
from?
whole Israelite community and the aliens living among them will be forgiven because all the people were involved in that intentional wrong. So he's going back and forth, and he's talking about distinction. One and the same law applies to everyone who sins unintentionally, whether they are a native-born Israelite or they're a sojourner or they're an alien or they're a foreigner. But anyone who sins defiantly, whether they're native-born or a sojourner, blasphemes Adonai, and that person must be cut off from the people. Because he has despised Adonai's word and broken his commands, that person must surely be cut off. And so then they bring in an example of a Sabbath breaker who was put to death. This person was found gathering wood. And he said, well, you should take him outside and stone him. And so they took him outside and they stoned him. And right after that, then the Lord says to Moses, speak to the Israelites, Bnei Yisrael, and tell them, throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the corners of your garments with a blue cord on each tassel. Now, I actually think that there's a lot of room in here. I understand where Rabbi Eric is coming from. I think that there's a lot of room in here, though, for us to say God is showing distinction clearly and saying that some of these things are specifically for Jews and some of these are specifically for everyone, right? And so this, like, I could see people reading this and being like, okay, well then fringes on the borders of their garments is for everyone, and they need to do that for all their generations also. But I see it instead as he's making distinctions, and he's saying, no, these laws for the atonement for sin are for both. These laws, the same accountability for breaking the Sabbath is for foreigners and for Israelites, the same. And now he's actually going and speaking to a specific group. Now he's saying, speak to the Israelites. Bnei Yisrael is the actual, if you look at the actual Hebrew, it's Bnei Yisrael, and say to them, throughout the generations to come, you're to make tassels on the corners of your garments with a blue cord on each tassel. So that's my theological objection that I have with it. And then I have some cultural objections to non-Jewish people wearing, especially a talit gadol.
Talit gadol, right.
a
Or
talit gadol
katan, either
or a
talit katan, yeah.
But like often instead of that, you just see them like tying it onto the
Tying fringes on,
corners of their pants, which, okay. So just to address it from the cultural perspective, a talit gadol has a specific meaning within Jewish community. Now you could say like it doesn't matter because all that matters is the commandments of God. Okay, fine. If you want to just like be obedient to God's commandments and ignore cultural distinctions and like kind of like muddy and murky, make the waters of identity murky, you can, but I don't think that that's appropriate either, because you have to realize that when a Jewish person comes into a community, and we have seen this for 30 plus years in our community, they assume that people that are wearing a talit gadol are Jewish.
Right.
Period. Like they assume that those people are.
They're very surprised if somebody comes in and is wearing one and is not. Often I will even get a question. Somebody will say, well, is that person Jewish?
Right.
And it's somebody that we haven't had conversations with. We're not going to blast people who come in that way. We're going to spend some time with them and, back to the pastoral aspects of all of this. We're going to take care of those people and help them understand what it is they're doing and what is not okay about that.
And then the second thing is that, like, obviously you don't really wear a talit gadol out in public. Like, it's for worship. Now, a talit katan is an undergarment that has the fringes kind of built into it. It's a smaller tallis, and you wear it underneath your clothes. Many observant Jews will wear that. Orthodox in particular, especially ultra-Orthodox, you'll see them frequently with talit katan. But they also don't ever wear their fringes outside of their pants, just kind of dangling there, unless like they were running around playing soccer or something.
Of course.
So that also is a cultural distinction too, that you don't really see like fringes tied onto belt loops. You don't really see like a talit katan on display, because it's a private act of worship. It's like I'm fulfilling the commandment to Bnei Israel, to the sons of Israel, to do this thing that God has asked the Jewish people to do. And that really is what Bnei Israel means. We could talk about the suzerain contract that David Stern wrote about, and this reality of like God expanding his covenantal responsibilities, like with each group. Like to Abraham, it was this. To Abraham and Isaac, it was this. To Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it was this. When Messiah came, there was an expansion of those responsibilities that are on the people of God, right? So I understand people debating these things, but like culturally, when a Jewish, and like, have they not, okay, and this goes to like a fundamental question I have.
Okay.
Do they just have completely different people in that part of the world than we have? Because they're talking about this like this is never a problem. People will wear a talit gadol, a talit katan, wear fringes on the borders of their garments. They will circumcise their kids on the 8th day. They will come and learn Torah. They will like do all of these other things. And they are still very clear about their identity as a Gentile. Where are you finding these people? Because we don't have those people. That is not what has happened for 30 years in our congregation.
35 years.
35 years. For 35 years, what we've seen in our congregation, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because you might remember more of this, like, and I was gone doing ministry for a while, like, but every time we saw people really take on a whole bunch of the specific garb affectations or cultural affectations of Jewish life, who were not Jewish, who were not born Jewish, and had no Jewish identity in their family for generations. What I have seen, especially after being the senior leader of our congregation, is they are confused. They often have elevated Jewish identity above relationship with Yeshua. It becomes a confusion for the Jewish and Gentile children.
They're often critical of Jews, Messianic Jews within our congregations, because they feel like they don't get it right. I mean, why are you eating this, or why are you not wearing this? They're actually critical of the Jewish people in the congregation in a very arrogant way. That's the fruit we've seen.
Pride.
That's
we have seen a fruit of pride. And so maybe they have very different people than us. And so maybe
doubt
in
it.
their community. I mean, I doubt, yeah.
How
But
could
I'm
they- I
trying
mean-
to set up a strong man argument for them,
Okay.
which is like maybe they have not had to deal with the problems that we have of identity confusion, where we've seen people renounce their faith in Messiah and like convert to Orthodox or to conservative Judaism. We've seen whole families where the children believe that they are Jewish and they're actually not, and it's led to such a crisis of identity that
Yes,
they've entirely
absolutely.
walked away from their faith in Messiah. We've seen so much brokenness come out of this in our community that it seems untenable to think that we should blur the cultural realities and distinctions, much less the theological distinctions that it feels to us. Like that feels to me like a commandment to Jews. The way I read Numbers 15 is that is a commandment to Jews. I also believe that circumcision of males on the 8th day is a commandment to Jews. I do not believe that that is for the nations. I think it is one of the distinctive marks that God has put upon the Jewish people. Yes, I know that Abraham was required to be circumcised. I understand that there's a representation of the circumcision of the heart, but the circumcision of the heart does not make one Jewish. And in fact, that's exactly what Acts 15 was about. Acts 15 was, no, they already have the Holy Spirit. They don't need to become Jews, because it's not about being a Jew outwardly. It's about being a Jew or righteous inwardly. It's about having a right relationship and a right heart with God. And we have seen, instead of people having a right relationship and heart for God, we've seen it lead them the opposite direction, where sometimes they turn their back on a real, like, loving, intimate relationship with God. And am I wrong? Like, what have you seen? You've been around for a long time. And that confusion has been around a long time. Like, I think still in many Messianic congregations, there's an expectation that if you are a man, you should put on a tallis when you come in for a Shabbat service.
Well, initially for us, none of this was an issue, because 35 years ago, it was about all of these Jewish people who had come to believe in Messiah, and they didn't know how to worship. And they even thought, maybe I'm no longer a Jew. And the church was telling them, you're no longer a Jew. Yay. You know? And so the whole vision of the early parts of Messianic Judaism were very different. We didn't even really deal with these issues. We had people coming in who said, yay, I can continue to be a Jew and worship my Lord. So it's been almost like 35 years. It's been like in that middle 10 years, what began to happen was people drawn to us who were wanting to do the outer shows of things. They wanted to wear this or wear that, but it wasn't. It was hard. It was actually a contentious spirit. I can only explain that we had a Hebrew program and people were learning Hebrew, and everybody was learning Hebrew, and everybody wanted to be able to read from Torah. And for a period of time, if somebody learned Hebrew at Beth Yeshua, they did get to read from Torah, whether they were a Jew or a Gentile. And that did happen. But what we found was it led to even more confusion. Right. And I remember we had a family that was not Jewish who actually were able to get their children on birthright to Israel based on the fact that they had had a bar or bat mitzvah with us. They didn't say it was a Messianic congregation, but do you see what I'm saying? It's like they used that to get a birthright thing that was intended for people who were born Jewish to get to go to the land. Right. And so we saw a lot of abuses, and it's been this pulling back. And I remember your dad, Rabbi Rube, used to say, well, okay, he would pray with people. If you're not Jewish and you think you're supposed to wear a talit, he would try to pray with people and try to appeal to their common sense about whether you should be doing this. He was a very kind person in that sense. He didn't want to hurt anybody in terms of making a line that they could not cross. But what happened was it did just the very thing, because then it set up that value again. It said there has to be a reason. You are more valuable if you're a Jew in this environment. And you're not. Now, you get back to the word chosen, the whole chosenness. That word itself is a huge trigger for people. Well, why wasn't I chosen? Really? You really want to be chosen for everything the Jewish people were chosen for? Right. But so we didn't really see a lot of this happening. And I know that you deal with people on a weekly basis where you are having conversations with them about whether or not Beth Yeshua is the right place for them when they inquire, when they come on the website and inquire. And there were those who would feel that how could we do that? How could we ask people to have a conversation before we let them come in? But what we have found is that it begins to change everybody in that in the congregation. It is no longer a place where a person who is Jewish feels comfortable. Josh, I remember a time when you didn't even want to put on a talit because everybody was wearing a talit.
Right.
And you thought, why? Where's the significance in this? And you as a Jewish person didn't even want to wear one.
Yep.
So
let's go
anyway.
into that. That's actually a good transition into pastoral care. And let's just be like really upfront about all the things that I think would really anger people about our community.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
Because honestly, like we do not fit the traditional mold of seeker-friendly anything. Like if you were looking at like what is the common definition of success for a community, a faith community, typically it's numbers and revenue. No, it's not for us. It's whether or not we're actually fulfilling the mandate that God has asked us to do.
Absolutely.
There are people that will come into a community that do not share the values of that community. And when you are small and you have finite resources, you have to decide how you're going to spend those finite resources. Where's the place I can invest my energy and get the most transformational good?
Absolutely.
Anyway, so because of that, let's just talk about the things that we've done that will get us canceled.
Okay.
We don't have our address on the website. If you want to come to Beth Yeshua, that's great. Send an email. Those emails come to me. I read through them, and most of the time, as I've shared before on this podcast, I'm looking for heart. I'm just looking for the heart of a person. Like, where's their heart at? Are they in a place where it feels like teachable and right? Do they feel like they're in a place of actually like loving the Jewish people if they're not Jewish? Or does it feel like they would like to be the Jewish people? Does it feel like they are, if they're coming from a Jewish perspective, does it feel like they're actually really open to Messiah? Or does it feel like they just kind of want to come and see our freak show and like come and check us out? We have a vetting process. And so I'm sure like that feels, I would imagine, discriminatory. That is absolutely discriminatory. And yes, it is.
It's about distinction.
We are
for
making
sure.
a judgment on where people's hearts are at after a few emails back and forth. And God, please give me the wisdom, the continued wisdom in those emails, because my desire is not to deter anybody that God is leading to come and bring into this community. And may he rebuke me and deal with me as his child, because I have no desire to not, I'm not interested in arranging an obstacle for people that are supposed to be coming in.
Right.
And not having your address is an obstacle. Like in this day and age, it is absolutely an obstacle. Another thing that we do is we are aligned in some ways with the public acts of worship within the congregation halacha of the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council. So this was something that we looked at also when we decided to have a real clarity of what halakhically would be considered a Jewish person within our community. We said, okay, and then what will Jews do and what will Gentiles do? And can we have distinction there of these roles? Now, these are the places we decided to land. I understand these rabbis not landing in those places. I understand they might have like a very different clientele than we have. We didn't tend to have a lot of Hebraic roots here in Northern California. I don't know why. I don't know if that's just because, God lifted all of the nation of America and all the nuts rolled to the coasts. I don't know. Like, I don't know what happened there, but like we have a lot of people that are like really very much on their own spiritual path. And if we're not going to endorse their spiritual path, they're going to burn the place to the ground, man. And so we have Jewish people read from Torah. We would have Jewish people lead the liturgical prayers, like serve in the place of Gabbai or Cantor. We would have a Jewish person lean the Torah, read the Torah, make Aliyah to Torah. And we have that anybody can come, either Jew or Gentile, and read the Brit Chadashah. We have a Brit Chadashah reading each week. We do not have bar and bat mitzvahs for non-Jewish children. We have confirmations for them instead. If they want to read in Hebrew, which we recommend, because learning Hebrew is actually, I think, an important thing. If you're going to worship within a Jewish, Messianic Jewish space, like there's a lot of Hebrew. It's really good for you to understand what you're saying before God. Then they can read parts of the Brit Chadashah out of a Jewish New Testament. And they can give a commentary on that. We believe that, yes, Gentiles have a responsibility to parts of Torah, not all of Torah, just like I don't have a responsibility to the parts of Torah that are for the Kohanim, because I'm not a Kohen. But, like the Ten Commandments, yes, so should we have like a Gentile read from the Torah scroll, the Ten Commandments, which are like commandments that we agree that everybody should be abiding by? Well, honestly, like 99% of the commandments everybody should be abiding by. So no, we shouldn't have them read from the Torah scroll, because it also has a cultural definition reality, which is when you go into any synagogue anywhere, they will not invite a non-Jewish person to make aliyah to Torah. Period. It doesn't happen. It's like usually they're actually looking for like a person from Bnei Yisrael and a person who's like Levi and a person who's Kohanim. Like they're looking for 3 people to come up and make aliyah, and like all of those people are Jews. They're not looking for non-Jewish people to come up. So that sends a weird message if a Jewish person comes into our community and they see a non-Jewish person being called to read Torah. Also, what we ran into in the past is when non-Jewish people read the Torah all the time, the Jewish people didn't.
That's true.
The Jewish people didn't read from Torah. And I mean, that's our own problem, right? Like, that's on us. We should be pushing for...
No, but I have a feeling it's something related to the fact that you didn't want to wear a talit because everybody was wearing one. And it's almost like, oh, okay, they're doing this. They're doing this. They don't need me.
And specifically towards bar and bat mitzvahs, as the youth leader, I saw bar and bat mitzvahs, which we called
Bar Avraham, yes, right? At the time, yes.
At the time, I saw those confused children.
Absolutely.
I saw those spiritually confused children, and for some of them, by even the time they left with their families from Beth Yeshua, they were still in a place of spiritual confusion as to like who they were, what was their identity, and therefore what was their role before God. And it was so much about that and that observance, that Jewishness, that they weren't even really in contact with Yeshua. They weren't really like being like good disciples of the Messiah.
And we're not doing anybody we're not doing anybody a favor if we don't acknowledge what distinctions God has put in place. So for us to tell a kid, we're going to celebrate a B'nai Avraham or a Bat Avraham but when we do that to the kid, we're actually giving them such a mixed message that they don't know how to deal with that. They don't even know how to cope with that. I'm not sure their parents know how to cope with it. Right. But many of them have walked away from the faith. Many of them have walked away from any faith of any kind related to God whatsoever, because it's been a heartbreaking situation. So we are doing a very big disservice by not telling somebody, just calling people for what they are. And because if we don't, then we're saying we're giving credence to that whole thing about value. Oh, no, you have to do it this way because then you're closer to being a Jew and you have to be a Jew. You do not have to be a Jew.
This is interesting because this goes back towards pastoral care. So the beginning of the podcast that we listened to was predicated on social media.
Yes.
And I don't know what happened on the social media. But how many of those people that were posting that they had distinction between Jew and Gentile in their communities have been through things like we have been through?
I wonder.
We have seen, it's not as if we like came to this willy-nilly. It's not as if we like woke up one day and we're like, how can we make Gentiles feel lesser within our communities? That's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. Our wrestle is like, we love the Gentiles who are Ruth-hearted. We love the ones that are called to be part of this Messianic Jewish reality and what we're doing together. How can we love on them and still maintain distinctions so that they don't get confused? Because that is pastoral care also.
Yes.
And you have to be concerned for that confusion, because that confusion derails people's spiritual lives. Now, the whole beginning of this podcast that we listened to was really about like, okay, these things are happening on social media, but we think it's discriminatory. We think that it's wrong. We think that it's valuative, right? I think that many of these communities might have actually gone through what we've gone through and have come to these sort of through prayer and fasting and fear and trembling, just
Absolutely.
like we have. These are not arbitrary. These are not like, easily made decisions. And so I think that like this idea of pastoral care, am I really caring for my community when I blur identity? Now, they would say maybe that they're not blurring identity because they have people in their community who are very clear that they are Gentile. And then they take on a whole bunch of other Jewish observance. I mean, maybe it's not things that we would consider like deal breakers. There are some deal breakers for me. Like if you're lighting candles on a Friday night, that is a cultural Jewish reality. That is not a commandment in Torah. So Gentiles should be really careful about that, right? Like there are ways for you to honor the Sabbath without doing it as our people have done for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Secondly, like wearing a talit. That seems to me speak to the Israelites, speak to Bnei Israel. That to me sounds like Jews. Same for circumcision, right? Man, we talked about this. Passover. Passover is a weird one where like you're expected to convert if you're going to, and is that just partaking of the Passover sacrifice, right? Anyways, so there are some deal breakers for me, but like the reason we actually have other distinctions as part of corporate worship is because corporate worship is a different space. And pastorally, I have a responsibility for what that space communicates as far as our values and who we are as a movement, and the one in Messiah that I feel is proper versus the one in Messiah where I feel it's confusion. And so what you are asked by God to do in your closet at home is in some ways no part of my business until it makes its way into the synagogue's doors. And then it becomes my business, because now if you're coming in and identifying as a Jew if you're not a Jew, or taking on cultural realities of Jewish life if you're not Jewish, and you're starting to blur those lines of identity, that is when your private choices meet corporate shared space. And there's, I mean, even legally, right? You can yell fire in your house at home, but you can't yell it in a crowded theater. Right? There's this burden of responsibility for the rest of the people within the space that you're inhabiting. And that, and they started their whole conversation about pastoral care. Pastoral care. Is it really loving to the Christians that are coming that want, what was it? Not purity, piety.
Piety.
Who are searching for this sense of holiness and piety. Is it really wrong for us to turn them away? I would say it depends.
Do we have the market on piety? I hope not. I hope everybody.
Yeah, are we to assume that everybody's actually really coming with the right heart intent?
Right.
And how much time are we going to spend trying to make them understand what their heart intent should actually be versus discipling the Jewish and intermarried families on how they can, what we talked about last time we had a podcast, how they can have multiple generations of culturally Jewish children and grandchildren. Like, how can we help them understand and identify the camps that they can go to and send their kids to? And how can we help them wrestle through halacha and the way that they're going to walk in their own home? Are they going to light candles? Are they not? How can we do all of that as a small community with finite resources?
Finite resources. Yes, you brought that up before.
And the pastoral care part to me is I understand. I have their heart. I want to love everybody. We tried loving everybody in the same room for 30 years. And they might say, well, you just didn't maybe do it right. Oh man, we tried. We really we did so many. We had multiple classes. I taught a class called Messi 101, where we just went through Messianic Judaism to help kind of onboard people towards becoming members and part of our community. That didn't work. We had Hebraic roots people and other like people come and like try to take over the congregation. I mean, even actually, like literally.
Yes.
We really tried to like help kids understand that just because they were coming to a Jewish space doesn't make them a Jew, right? And so like, but that even like we're one voice, but their parents are telling them, we go to a Jewish place, you're a Jew. We go to a Jewish place, you're a Jew. And so I understand their heart and burden for pastoral love and for care, and like I do have a heart for many of these Gentiles, and I want them to come to the right place. But I also can't do that at the cost of the health of the corporate body that we have, because we were inundated, and I don't know what their ratios are like, but
Right.
we were absolutely inundated with Hebraic roots people until we made some really, what they would, I'm sure, consider maybe unloving, unpastoral decisions of how to limit who comes in the door, and have distinction, practical. And that was one thing I did not hear in their podcast. And maybe they're going to get to it in part 2. What distinctions do they have?
Right.
What distinctions do they have? Especially because one of them circumcised, this is a non-Jewish person, Rabbi Toby. And I love him. I don't really know him. Rabbi Toby, I love you, man. I don't know whether or not that was like God's decision for you. Maybe it was, man. I don't know. But I do know that for the people in our community that did similar things, it turned out to be really hard for their children. It turned out to really cloud their identity. And I don't know, maybe they're able to be very, very clear. And maybe we're just not good at pastoral care, and we need to do a lot better. I mean, honestly, that was one of the things I took away from this podcast was, yeah, we need to do better at pastoral care.
Absolutely. We're not saying that we've got it down, but
Nope.
not from lack of trying. I mean, we've worked very, very, very hard at it, and to appreciate people. And I think back to kind of the beginning, to me, I told you that it's been significant to me that I've been called into this position as a Gentile, and because I'm the mother of Jewish children. I mean, we believe in patrilineal or matrilineal descent, and but I had to be fully on board for that. And I think our biggest challenge is to deal with the mixed marriages that we have at Beth Yeshua and help that non-Jewish one understand their calling to still raise Jewish children that are identifiably Jewish. And how do you do that? You can't, you don't do it by becoming a Jew. You do it by becoming everything God called you to be. And that is, culturally, is introducing the cultural things to them, as well as allowing them to understand the distinctions that God's made. And God never makes a distinction that he doesn't empower the people to live it out and make it a joy for them, and to make it a special, significant thing to him. He loves the Gentile people. He made a path for all to come back to him. But he didn't make us all Jews. He didn't make us all women. He didn't make us all Levites, so.
I know. And it's really...
You didn't play that little clip.
Yeah, I want to play that clip. It really is, to me, like, I don't know that at the end of the day, any of this is like a deal breaker for me as far as fellowship.
Absolutely,
and love.
yeah.
Like, I am sure that these 4 leaders, these 4 rabbis. Oh, and I do want to be clear. I'm technically not a rabbi. I am on the path of smicha. I'm the leader of our community, but I have not received my rabbinic ordination yet. But these rabbis, I'm sure, are doing what they believe is best, and maybe they're really hearing from God. And it was one of the things that I wanted to play as part of this clip. Toby brought this up. He said, are you saying to me that for 20 years of decisions within Messianic life, like, I haven't been hearing the Holy Spirit? Like, I've been making wrong decisions, ungodly decisions? My answer to that is, no, man. Like, I'm not the judge of your heart. All I know is that in my community, we wouldn't probably have you play the same role that you're playing in your community. You would you would be like, we actually have both of our Hebrew teachers are Gentiles, and they prepare all of our bar bat mitzvahs and all of our kids that go through confirmation. They teach Hebrew classes that actually like really like get the Hebrew of our whole but I probably wouldn't have you be a Gabbai or a cantor. I probably wouldn't have you learn Torah. And it's not because I'm saying like you didn't hear from God, and of course you wouldn't put yourself under my authority because we don't see eye to eye on these things. But like I'm just like I'm not in that place to judge whether or not he heard from God. I don't know, and I don't know if what we're talking about today is what God has given us permission to live out authentically within our community, or if it is actually something that is for the broader community. I think so, just because of the fruit that we saw, the negative spiritual fruit that we saw of not having clarity, of not having distinction. And then also that brings up the idea of the difference between discrimination and distinction, which actually is in Toby's thing also. So let me just play this really quick here. This is for people following along at home. This is at 27 minutes and 49 seconds.
Into their podcast.
Into this episode. And I'm just going to let this play for a bit so you can hear the context. This is the beginning of when Rabbi Toby begins to talk.
This is Rabbi Toby. Just in the off chance, I guess somebody wants to address something I say, you know where to find us. Timestamp. So the problem is, I can begin with just my life in the movement. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but so the first thing is that David Stern, in his New Testament commentary, Jewish New Testament commentary, David Stern says that there are distinctions between Jews and Gentiles or non-Jews, but those should never be grounds for discrimination. So when somebody makes the argument that a Gentile shouldn't wear tallits or do liturgy, so you're discriminating. Now, they wouldn't see it that way because some people really are dedicated to being right.
Oh man, that's rough. And so I'm just going to stop it there really quick, and let's address that. As we've been talking for the last hour plus, we don't disagree with that because we're dedicated to being right. We disagree with that because of the spiritual fruit that we've seen. We disagree with that because of 35 years of ministry. We're not discounting your years of ministry, so don't, discount our years of ministry, right? So that's not why people are disagreeing with you. I think that people are disagreeing actually in good faith often. I think that the other people even who maybe share our position or are more aligned with our position are doing it because they actually believe that it's right and healthy and proper. Secondly, when David Stern said there should be distinction without discrimination,
right?
What does that mean to you? To me, what that means is, as I said, there is distinction, but there's not a lessening of value, right? And that to me is where discrimination takes over. Discrimination is your skin is a different color than my skin, therefore you are of a lower value than me. Distinction is, hey, your skin is different than mine. Now, we also have distinction within Scripture. And that distinction is distinction that I don't think we're allowed to really play around with, right? That's God distinctions. God gave commands to specific groups and told them specific things to do. And I don't think that I just disagree. I don't think that some of these commandments are for non-Jewish people to do. To me, that's not discrimination, because to me, that's not a diminishing of value. Can I see how somebody would take it as a diminishing of value? Yes. We've had people that are so angry and so hurt, and they're like, well, then I'm going to leave. And you might say, well, that's when you should change. And I'm like, is it? Or is that the place where, for me, within our community, this is where God has asked me to stand? And if a person can't accept that and be underneath that, then this Messianic Jewish congregation is not for them. And we have to be authentic in the same way they have to be authentic to the actual core values of what they're really trying to do, right? So then let me play the second part of this where he shares his life. But man, and he sounds upset. I don't know what's going on in the heart of Toby. Maybe he's not upset, but that sounds like kind of an upset sort of an argument. These are just people who want to be right. I think he probably has better like counter arguments to it than that. But that was the one he chose to use there.
In their own eyes. So they're going to find a reason to say, but you are discriminating. Here's my story. So 20 years ago, called into the movement, and it doesn't have to matter to whoever hears it, but it matters to me. So 20 years ago, I was called into the movement. When I walked into a Messianic synagogue for the first time, something came over me. I did everything I could to keep from crying through the whole service. Hearing the Hebrew language was making me cry. I couldn't understand why. I didn't understand what I was seeing or what I was hearing, but I knew that something was happening to me internally. And it was the Lord. I prayed for a year before I got my first talit. I have a whole slew of them at home now. Over the years, I've gifted talits to Jews and non-Jews. And I still own many, and I wear them every Shabbat. I'm not trying to sound, I prayed for a year before that. It was very important to me that I understood it, and that it was something that really meant something to me. I have been a cantor in Messianic synagogues since 2010. How did that happen? I was on the worship team. Our cantor left, and I was asked to be the cantor. Now, I could have said, wait a minute, is there a Jewish guy here who's a cantor? No, the Jewish rabbi at the synagogue said, I would like for you to be the cantor. And that started it in 2010. I'm still a cantor. I've been a worship leader and a youth leader. I'm currently an assistant rabbi. I can read and write Hebrew. I lead the Torah service. I can read from the Torah scroll. I can lean the Torah. I lead the bar mitzvah program, help lead the bar mitzvah program in our congregation. My son is in a shrenu, learning Hebrew. My wife and I prayed and felt led to circumcise our son on the 8th day. Now, I've said quite a bit of things, but someone can answer this 3 ways. You can say, every single thing that I've done for the past 20 years has been wrong and not led by the Holy Spirit. Now, if you say that, you have a problem because you're passing judgment on what you think God is doing in my life. Okay, well, have fun with that if you'd like to do that. The second thing is if you say, no, it's not a problem, then it destroys some of the arguments that some of these people make, my brothers in the faith and sisters in the faith that make these arguments. If you say, you know what, I don't have a right to judge, well, then that also destroys your argument, because if you don't have a right to judge, then you shouldn't be you shouldn't be platforming arguments such as, Gentiles shouldn't do this. If you think one person possibly could do it. See, it used to be, I could say, to explain Ruth. The problem is I've heard a rabbi say, well, Ruth is one person. So apparently God has to do something a lot of times for it to be accepted as truth. Yeshua said certain things once. Oh, he didn't say it. He only said that one time, so we don't have to worry about it. So Ruth was one person. She wasn't, but she was an example that they really highlighted. The mixed multitude I've heard as a great example of how God included Gentiles, but I've also heard the argument that, well, that's one thing. That was one time. So how many times does God have to do it? So the problem is that what I see people doing is they take the word of God and they add their own weights and measures to it. How they measure what God says as much as they want to measure it. And they put as much weight as they want to put on something God says and put more weight on something else. And that is really slippery. Here's some other problems that I have with this. Jewish people, of course, and I'm talking about from the perspective of people who make this argument that Gentiles shouldn't be included completely. Intermarried is an issue for me. Why? Well, obviously a Jewish couple's fine. But what's interesting is what some people don't see, how insidiously superior this argument, an argument of superiority is. Oh, I see. So my Gentile self and my Gentile wife, we need to be excluded, but your Gentile wife or husband is lucky because they got picked by a Jewish person. So they get to do this stuff. So that's a problem.
Which we actually wouldn't. We actually wouldn't say that. We wouldn't say like, hey, mom, because you married a Jew, you need to come up and read from Torah. We actually wouldn't do that at all. We would say, you have a responsibility, if you really believe that God has called you into that marriage to raise Jewish children, to raise Jewish grandchildren, to have a Jewish home in the way that your spouse needs for you to have a Jewish home, at the pace that they want you to have it. And that's for you guys to wrestle through. But for public acts of worship, we wouldn't have the non-Jewish person within an intermarriage come up. So I'm not sure who on social media said that. And there was another thing that he was talking about there too, which is like, you can read this in one of three ways. You can either say that I haven't heard from God at all, or you can say that, well, that's fine for you, in which case then it like destroys your argument. And I don't buy really either of those. That seems like a false dichotomy to me. Like, right. I can actually wonder whether or not you heard from God, and wonder whether or not I've heard from God, and yet still be very convinced of the things that God has led me towards, and say like, no, I'm gonna stay with the things that God has asked me to do for my community, irrespective of your personal experience. Now, do I believe that he has 20 years of sin, like sinful decisions? No. But also, like, I know I have plenty of sin in my last 20 years. I have plenty of times where, like, I really thought I heard things from God, and I'm wondering if I did. We thought we were supposed to move to Israel. We took our whole family over there. We got all of our paperwork together for Aliyah. We put in our paperwork and waited until it was blocked by all the way to the Supreme Court of Israel, because they found out that we were believers. Like, and so God, were we supposed to do that? I don't know. But I think it's also really presumptuous to say that in those 20 years of making those decisions, which have been prayerful decisions, that you haven't messed up. And I don't know. Maybe he hasn't messed up. Maybe I am completely wrong, but I don't think so. Bubby, are you still there?
I am. My battery went low. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
My battery
How
went
low is your battery?
I don't, low.
Oh.
But see, no matter how we pray, we still must base everything on the principles of God in the Word. And
which he brought up, and I thought it was interesting that he was like, you put more weight on some scriptures than others. And I was like, but it feels to me like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm being fair, it feels to me like you're weighting one verse and saying this was to B'nai Yisrael, and so it's for everybody that was part of that mixed multitude. And mixed multitude is not in there. B'nai Israel is.
Right.
So that to me feels like you weighting it based on a historical observation, not the other way around. Right. And so, like, this is where reasonable people can disagree. And, man, I don't know. Like, and so, yeah, I'm not going to cast, like, judgment on him, because I'm not Yeshua. I'm not the king. I'm not the judge.
None of us
I'm
are
not
to be judge.
And so, like, but would we have him do those same roles in our community? No.
No. All right.
Anyways, yeah. So I don't know if that's all of what we're going to do. They might have a part 2. They might cancel us or start a flame. No, they won't.
I don't know.
Once again, we love you guys so much. Rabbi David, Eric, Jonathan, Toby. I
love that the conversations are happening. I love that people are even bringing these out and discussing them. It's okay.
Yes.
That's
and there was a long
thing.
time in Messianic Judaism where it was just the wild, wild west. It was just like everybody shows up and whatever you want, just like go for it. Man, there's a problem with that. So I'm glad that we are in a place that's a little bit more deliberate. Absolutely. Yeah. That's really important. All right. Well, thank you, Bubby. We'll get back into this at some point. Or maybe we'll move to something else. There's some other people that I want to interview. Man, I'd really love to get some rabbis to weigh in on which commandments were given to the descendants, the physical Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and which ones they believe are for everyone. Like, where for them are the lines of distinction.
And let's bring Rabbi Schiffman back for that.
That would be a good one. That'd be a good one. I also would love to hear Rabbi Russ on that. Like, Rabbi Russ, I know you're not listening to us, but man, come on, Rabbi Russ. We love you. All right. Well, I love you, Bubby.
Love you too, dear.
We'll talk soon. Have a lovely rest of your day. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody out there, find us on YouTube at Beth Yeshua SAC, S-A-C, or you can find us on Spotify. And if you're curious about our community, you can check out bethyeshua.org, not com.org. All right.
And stay in the conversation.
Stay in the conversation.
Stay in the conversation.
Yes. And listen, if we upset you, like, we love you. Like, these are not light decisions. This is not light. And like, how people live their lives is not light.
No.
We understand that. And people finding value in what they do corporately together for worship, we understand that. But we've also seen, a lot. So, all right, Bubby. Love you.
All right.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can always visit bethyeshua.org for more.